Fishing TV News, brought to you in association with Anglers Mail. A monster 13-pound 1-ounce eel is the highlight in a week that's seen a raft of exciting big fish news. Day ticket carp angler David Saunders reported the huge eel, which is nearly 2 pounds bigger than the long-standing British record, from East Sussex's Idenwood fishery. Sadly, he will not be able to claim a record due to lack of independent witnesses combined with the disappointing photographs. But he put it back and it's there waiting to be caught again. You'd have had to be on another planet to have missed the death of two-tone, the British record carp. Caught at weights up to 67 pound 8 ounces, the iconic mirror was found dead at Conningbrook Lake in Kent, and messages of rest in peace came in from anglers all over Britain. The story even made the national news. Two-tone is seen here with Dynamite Bait's Carp Cup winner Darryl Peck, before it reached its ultimate top weight to Oz Holness. There was sad news too of another passing, this time of a human angling great. Former National Federation of Anglers president David Bird died after losing a battle against long-term ill health. David fought for angling and fish welfare issues for over 30 years, in many roles, and was much admired for his honesty and commitment. The UK's top mixed predator fishery, Bury Hill in Surrey, has caused a stir before the pike season starts in earnest by banning treble hooks. A maximum size 4 single hook must now be used by day ticket anglers fishing for the venue's pike and zander. The management claims that barbless single hook rigs and smaller baits will not only see an increase in the number of runs, but virtually all fish caught will be hooked cleanly in the scissors. Duncan Charman proved to us that you can catch loads of Bury Hill predators on single hooks in a great episode of Online Fishing TV's Session series. One of the biggest angling events of the year, the Evesham Festival, takes place at the end of August. Set around the Worcestershire market town of Evesham, this festival attracts over 50,000 visitors to the tackle stands, craft fair and kids attraction. Visit the Anglers Mail just after Bank Holiday weekend for results and full coverage. The Scottish shark tagging programme has been celebrating as it logged its 1,000th fish. But that's not all, folks. A massive 73-pound tope was the highlight of that mission, caught by Jan Medschling from Amsterdam on his annual fishing trip to Scotland. The Scottish Sea Angling Conservation Network says the data revealed by tracking the tags is crucial in allowing the right management decisions to be made to ensure the survival of shark, skate and ray species. If you want to know more, check out the Shark Attack episode of Online Fishing TV's Sea Watch UK series. And finally, if you like freebies, there's a bait bowl with the August 31st issue of Anglers Mail. Fishing TV News, brought to you in association with Anglers Mail.
So what about your reel line? Line's just line, isn't it? Well, if you think that, that's where you're wrong, because lines have different properties, and those properties can make quite a big difference between the technique working and not working. First thing I'd look at is your line strength. I see a lot of anglers out there using 6, even 8 pound line for Pellet Waggler fishing because they're catching big fish, often fish averaging well over 5 pounds. The problem with using thick line, because if a line is stronger, it's thicker, is that you've got to cast this, and you've got to cast sometimes quite a distance, not necessarily with a huge float. If you're using 6, 8 pound line, it is going to hinder your casting at times. And to be honest, I would recommend that you never need to go over 5 pound line, and at times 4 pound line is ample. Even if I'm expecting double figure fish, I will never fish with more than 5 pound line on the reel when I'm Pellet Waggler fishing. It's all about balanced tackle, getting big fish in, you know. If you've got a right balance between your rod, your main line and your hook length, you should be able to get any double figure fish in, you know, low double figure fish with 4 or 5 pound main line. The other thing you want to look at for your choice of reel line for Pellet Waggler fishing is what I'd call the line properties. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, some lines float, some lines sink quite quickly. What do you want for Pellet Waggler fishing? Well, first point is avoid floating lines. Why? Well, floating lines, by their nature, will sit in the surface layers of the water. They'll sit on top of the surface layers of the water. A lot of these commercial fisheries where you're going to be pellet waggler fishing are going to be quite open, subject to windy days. You know, if you've got the line on the surface of the water, the wind will pick the line up and it'll push the line and therefore the float and therefore the hook bait out of the swim. Believe you me, these fish are fished for a day in, day out. If they've got a hook bait that's behaving unnaturally because the float's being pulled out of the swim, you won't get a bite. So avoid floating lines at all costs. What you want is a line that you can sink quite easily, really. You know, some lines sink very, very quickly, and I'd probably avoid those, although they're better than floating lines. I'd look for a line which is what I would call neutral buoyancy, but your tackle dealer will be able to tell you a line that you can sink easily, and just with a flick of the rod, it'll be under the surface, and therefore it'll be out of the way of the wind. The final thing that you want to look at is whether the line is pre-stretched or not. With this sort of fishing, you need at all costs to avoid a pre-stretched line. These are lines that are usually designed for pole fishing when you have an elastic as your cushion. There's no elastic with this kind of method. The only cushion you've got really is your rod and any stretch in the reel line. You know, you're going to get aggressive takes, but in particular when the fish is under your rod tip and diving and darting around and making lunges, you know, there is a chance that even with a progressive rod, your rod could lock up. If you have a pre-stretched line, the line won't stretch, and basically a rod can lock up and the line could snap, or you could pull the hook out. If you've just got a normal reel line with maybe 30–40% stretch in it, the line will give a little bit and you'll avoid those hook pulls. So just to conclude with the line side of things, you know, look for a line that isn't floating and preferably doesn't sink too far. Look for a line that isn't pre-stretched, that will give you some give. And most of all, you've got to be casting with this method, so don't go for a ridiculously heavy line that's very thick and will hinder your casting. 5 or 4 pound reel line should be ample.
And here are 3 brands that receive the Tackle Zone seal of approval.
Now, one of the products we've been able to have a look at recently that's so new that we haven't even tried yet are these. They're the new Fox Pellet Wagglers. In fact, I think we're the first people to have them. Now, one of the problems with pellet waggler fishing is you're limited really as to how far out you can fish by how far you can feed, and that's how far you can catapult baits out. And the thing that makes these really different and possibly move the goalpost for pellet waggler anglers out there are these air brakes. Let me show you what they are. Now, the air brake is just like a sleeve that fits over the bottom of the pellet waggler. This is a normal loaded pellet waggler. It's got the weight in the base. The weight screws off like this. Now, these come with 2 of these, 2 different sizes. And what makes them really good is that not only are they going to get around one of the problems with fishing a loaded pellet waggler, which is stopping the waggler from diving deep when it hits the water. That's why a lot of people don't like to use loaded pellet wagglers. This sleeve will act as a brake when it hits the water, so you're fishing instantly at that time when you're most likely to get a bite, when the pellet hook bait is falling through the water. Not only that, but a real breakthrough, I think, is that you can actually feed using them. So you can feed as far as you can cast. And the way that you do that, just fit the sleeve on. There's a recess in this here. You can just put some pellets in there. 6mm pellets fit perfectly. And the idea is that you just put some ground bait around there, push it down. You obviously don't want to overload it. So if you think you've overloaded it, just take a few out. Just lock it with some ground bait. So obviously when that hits the water, the ground bait breaks off and it releases a pellet around your hook bait. Now, the other thing you might notice about these, excuse me, is the weights at the bottom. Now, they're adjustable. These are barrel brass weights. I won't take it off because they'll go everywhere, but you can see that you can add and take these off. So in different conditions, for instance, if you're fishing at range and it's choppy and you want the float to sit up higher so you can see it a little bit better, you could take a couple of these barrel weights off. or you could add them and have it sitting proud in calm conditions. Now these floats come in 6, 8, 10 and 12 gram, so obviously you know, with the bigger floats, with a 10 and 12 gram float, you can cast a long way, and it's potentially bringing fish into range that you can feed that otherwise were out of range. So there they are, the new Fox Pellet Wagglers with air brakes. Possible breakthrough? I look forward to finding out. Okay then, floats, one of my favourite subjects. I've got more floats than any grown man should be allowed to have, and every time I go in a tackle shop I want to buy everything I see, and you're going to be faced with a similar problem. You're going to go into a tackle shop to buy your Pellet Waggler and you might be confused because most of the manufacturers have Pellet Wagglers in all shapes and sizes. So I'm going to try and make it simple for you. It doesn't matter how many you see in the tackle shop, really there are only two types of Pellet Waggler. There are loaded Pellet Wagglers and there are unloaded Pellet Wagglers. And there are advantages to each, which I'm going to run through in a minute. Now, without wishing to be blindingly obvious, the difference between a loaded and an unloaded Pellet Waggler is a loaded Pellet Waggler carries the weight required to cock it correctly in the base of the float. So if I cast that out, that weight there will take the float down so that just the tip is showing. With an unloaded Pellet Waggler, like that, there is no weight in the base. So in order to make that cock correctly, I'm going to have to add shot, something I'll come to in a minute. There are three main materials used for Pellet Waggler manufacture. The ones you'll mainly see in the shops will either be made out of clear plastic tubing like that. Can be quite good when the fish are quite shy or spooking off floats going in. You know, the clear plastic can be harder for the fish to see, so it's always worth having a couple of these in your bag. Also, if you're fishing for F1s rather than carp, it could be worth using a clear plastic one. The main material used in Pellet Waggler manufacture is balsa. Balsa is quite a dense wood that carries a lot of weight. We're looking to create short floats that need a lot of weight for this method, and balsa is ideal. It's also very robust and easy to mass manufacture. So most of the Pellet Wagglers you see from the big names, the big float manufacturers, will be made of balsa. There is actually a third option, and that's called styrofoam. Now in the main you won't see too many of these from the big manufacturers. They tend to be made by individual float makers, but you can see you can create a very short float that carries a lot of weight. Absolutely ideal if the fish are very, very shallow. You can probably just about see I can actually squeeze this. It's nowhere near as robust as balsa and you couldn't mass manufacture it, but it's always worth having one of these in your box. So which one should you use? Should you use an unloaded Waggler or a loaded Waggler? It really is one of those things where there are distinct advantages to both, and top anglers will use loaded and unloaded Wagglers. Let's deal with unloaded first and the advantages of using an unloaded Waggler. Okay, this is one as you can see I've already got set up here now. The advantages of using an unloaded Waggler like this really revolve around how the whole method of Pellet Waggler fishing works. What we're looking to do with the Pellet Waggler is we're looking to catch fish that are willing to come into the upper layers of the water to get pellets, and they're reacting to the sound of the pellets going in. They call it the dinner bell in fishing circles. So we're feeding pellets, the fish are coming up to them, they're hearing the noise and they're turning to take a pellet. Okay? Using an unloaded float like this with shot around the float to lock it in place, we're playing on that, because when that shot hits the water it will make a noise like the pellets hit in the water. So what we're looking to do is cast out, the float hits the water, makes a splash, the fish turn and they see a pellet falling through the water. It's called fishing on the drop. So the pellet is falling through the water. As the pellet is falling through the water, that's when you're likely to catch the fish, because it thinks it's another item of loose feed. If you're fishing 2 foot deep, once it's got to 2 feet and it's just hanging there, it doesn't look natural and you're probably not going to catch a fish. The other big advantage with an unloaded float like this is how the float reacts when it hits the water. When an unloaded float hits the water, because of the shot around the base here, it's not going to dive deep, and that's really quite important, because if the fish are particularly shallow, let's say 2 foot deep or less, you don't want the float diving deep into the water, because you're going to get the bite when the pellet is still dropping, and you need to be effectively fishing instantly. So you want the float to hit the water, sit up, and you'll be able to see bite straight away. If the float was diving deep into the water, you might miss the bite. The other thing I want to bring up though is it's not all sweetness and light with unloaded floats. There are disadvantages. I mentioned in another piece that we're fishing for very big fish here that are going to put the line, the reel, the rod, everything under a lot of pressure. And of course, one of the problems with an unloaded float is you're having to put shot on the line. Now, putting large shot like this, these are SSG shot, onto line is going to damage it, and you are risking, with so much strain on the line, you're risking weakening a line and cracking off on a fish. Now what I do, and I don't know if you can see that, is I actually put the shot on silicone. So I've threaded some quite fine pole float silicone onto the main line, and I've put the shot on that with a float adapter in between. A float adapter is allowing me to change float to a bigger float should I wish to quite quickly. That should hopefully alleviate any problems with damaging the line. Other people I see have a doubled up loop of line and they put shot on doubled up line, but always bear that in mind, that if you're using an unloaded float there is a chance you'll damage the line, so try and come up with a way to stop that. Yeah, I mentioned that I'm using a float adapter, and it may be that you've not used one of these. You'll see that sitting in on the silicone in between the shot. What that allows me to do is basically change to a bigger float. So if conditions change, or if it gets windier, if I have to cast a bit further to the fish and need a bigger float, I can literally just unravel this, because they all sit on little pins. So you see that's just gone in there like that. You can probably see there that this is finer tubing than the bore of that pin there, so it's just holding it in place with a piece of rubber tubing. And if I want to change to a bigger float, I can literally just grab a bigger float, put that on there, and I'm fishing again literally in seconds without having to tackle down. So what about loaded wagglers? I've explained what's so good about unloaded. Why would you use a loaded waggler? Here's another example, by the way. You'll see that the loading is in the base there. It's a brass pin. First of all, if you're new to pellet waggler fishing, it just makes life so easy using a loaded pellet waggler. You just need to get it onto the line, cast it out, and it's sitting perfectly, so you don't need to worry about shotting or how much weight you should carry. You're just fishing easily straight away. But it's not just beginners who use loaded pellet wagglers. A lot of top match anglers use them at times as well. The main advantage, I think, of using a pellet waggler is when conditions dictate that you have to cast accurately and sometimes in difficult conditions. If you're into a headwind or a side wind, having a streamlined float with all the weight in the float makes it so much easier to cast accurately. You're in a situation where you've got benefits over using the unloaded float. Now, the big disadvantage with fishing with a loaded pellet waggler is because of that weight in the base of the float that helps so much with the casting. When it hits the water, the float has a tendency to dive quite deep into the water. And as I explained before, you're looking to be fishing straight away, and some of those bites are going to come in those first few seconds. Now, what the top guys tend to do is use a bit of casting technique, so that when the float hits the water, they flick the rod to the side, and it just checks it on landing, and so it lands more like that in a sort of sideways position than like that where it's going to dive. Yeah, it can be used with a little bit of technique just as effectively as an unloaded one, and I think it casts more accurately. So with a loaded pellet waggler, there's no shot involved, so you need a different way of attaching it to your line. Luckily there are various attachments out there. This is the one I use. I prefer an attachment that allows you to change depth, because you might find yourself chasing the fish, and with this one, the silicone and sleeves on this do make it quite easy to slide along the line without risk of damage. And I think it's worth me just showing you how this one comes together. Imagine this is your reel line coming from here, and you just want to add the waggler attachment. It comes with two sleeves. You just thread on one blunt end first, if I can get that through, which I can't. So sorry, pointed end through first. You then put on the snap swivel through the eye of the swivel. The second sleeve goes on through the blunt end. Okay, so what we've got is your two sleeves and your snap swivel. Okay, with this one you also get a plastic pin. It's quite difficult to show you, but what we're looking to do is just put one end of the plastic pin into there. You slide the swivel over the top. Just when you first put it on, you just need pushing on, so it's sitting in the little recess in the top there. Then you lock it in place with the other sleeve. You'll see that you can actually move this up and down without loosening it. And all that you do to attach the float is use the snap link. You open that up, and then whichever waggler you happen to be using, you just thread on the float, close the snap link, and that's it. you're ready to go.
And here are 3 floats that get the tackle zone thumbs up.